Namaskar. I am immensely happy to introduce my 10th poetry collection, MEDUSA, to my dear readers, fellow poets, friends, colleagues, family. This poetry collection it's published 1 year after my last poetry collection, a song, Half and Half, was published. And then in the meantime, I added a few more cantos to my long narrative poem, Sita. And the book is completely revised. So between my engagements with a song, Half and Half, and then Sita, two very different kinds of poetry collections, I conceptualized MEDUSA. This is the poetry collection with 67 poems. In this poetry book, I reclaim the myth of poetic. I have to thank my readers and my critics for accepting me, for taking my poetry with critical engagements, with such seriousness, with such academic inputs I have been receiving from each one of you. While I express my gratitude to you for being my serious readers and my critics, I am happy to offer a poetry collection titled MEDUSA, published from Black Eagle Publications, USA. This year, it's published only in the month of July 2025. In MEDUSA, I make an attempt to reappropriate the myth of Medusa not as a monster, but as a symbol of violated womanhood, reclaiming her agency. In our society, usually women are presented as a demoness or a goddess. In between these two extreme identities of women, the real woman, the common woman like you or me, is certainly missing. In this poetry book, MEDUSA, I bring out the here and now woman, a very contemporary woman, a woman of flesh and blood, a real woman, into my poetic personing. And then for that, I have not been trying to rewrite the canonical narratives. Rather, I am trying to restore dignity to silenced mythic figures like Medusa. She has been forever misinterpreted, forever misunderstood. So I have taken chunks of Medusa, the image of Medusa, in all the poems here and there, and then I'm using folklore and memory, memo culture. As a teacher of folk literature, I have been teaching memory culture. So somehow, my ideas of memory culture and my interpretation of memory culture definitely comes to my poetry, and my poetic idiom draws deeply from Indian and global folklore. Medusa myth and Medusa folklore is not Indian. I have taken it from Greek mythology. Then I'm trying to craft a cultural panorama where the personal and the ancestral and the personal and the political, they intersect. They engage with each other. My poetic voice carries the weight of oral traditions, ancestral memory, community storytelling, allowing folklore to speak to the contemporary dilemmas of gendered existence. In this poetry collection, each poem is a story. In fact, in my case, like in some of my interviews, I have already told you that I can never write a poem without a story. Like Sita is a story. I have written, the story of the Ramayana. I have taken the background story of the Ramayana, and then I have talked about many folk Ramayans and some oral stories related to the Ramayana culture. And then I have put that in the poetry book Sita. Similarly, in this poetry collection Medusa, I have been a storyteller. I always am happy when somebody calls me a storyteller. And in this poetry collection, I have been a storyteller, telling my stories in poetic language. Like the first poem here, Medusa, the title poem. Though there are a couple of other poems titled Medusa, then something related to Medusa and her lifestyle, and Medusa and her many emotions, and one title is Medusa on Fire in Long Covert Dusks. So that is about, if you talk about Helen Siso and Laugh of the Medusa, how she emphasizes that women should speak through their body. So in that particular poem, Medusa on Fire in Long Covert Dusks, here my Medusa is speaking through her body. So there are many women characters in this book as well as male characters. I have taken my father, and then his ideas, his emotions, the inspirations that he had given me, and then many men out there in the society who have been inspirational for me. They have been the poetic personae for this poetry collection. And then in another poem, that is Manthan, a ghazal, I have attempted to write ghazal. Rhyme scheme, proper rhyme scheme, and the rhyming pattern, and the stress pattern, everything I have followed that a ghazal should have. Then one poem is there, I like this poem very much, Manthan, a ghazal. And then the last stanza I would like to recite for you here. Nandini's conjecture, love churned me. This love was my Manthan. Love took me out of the darkness of cold fields like a granite. Oh, adorable! Love is umber, love granite. Love murky pebble, love a shingle bright. Love devotion, love renunciation, love melt, love a prayer from the heart. So somehow some Sufi images have influenced me while I wrote this ghazal. And then there is another poem in this book, Dushyant and Shakuntala. I have taken the story of Dushyant and Shakuntala. I have put it into 6 to 7 cantos or 6 to 7 parts. It's a long poem. Epilogue. There is one epilogue which is canto 8. So from the beginning to the end, how Shakuntala, she meets Dushyant, and then they fall in love, and then they marry. Then I'm using the story of Shakuntala and Dushyant from Indian folklore as well as from Indian mythology, and then gender discourses are there. So every time a poem has a story, and then I end up with some other critical discourse, and then the poem comes out sometimes as a lyrical poem, sometimes as a prose poem, sometimes as a story, even sometimes as a modern poem. So myth has resistance and redemption. These are the two things that I have been using in many of my poetry collections, and there is no wonder that here I have equally used myth as resistance and redemption. It is an epistemological framework for resistance, the kind of myth I have been using in my poetry. So in this poetry collection, Medusa becomes an archetype of a woman who, though demonized, rages as a redeemer. In a couple of poems, Medusa is presented as a demonish in the beginning, and then with that snake, her hair has a lot of snakes, and then in due course of time she raises as a redeemer. She echoes the voices of many culturally disfigured women in our patriarchal societies. And then sisterhood as poetic praxis. This is one thing. Somebody told me that in many of my poems, as in Medusa, I use sisterhood and sorority as poetic praxis. There is a consistent theme of sisterhood in Medusa. One poem is titled Sisterhood. Well, that is one of my very favorite poems. In fact, I would like you to read that poem Sisterhood when you go through this collection. There is a consistent theme of sisterhood in many of these poems, and particularly in the poem Sisterhood. I do not write in isolation. I write with you. I write as a chorus, giving a voice to women across time and space. And my bonding with many women out there becomes a radical act of solidarity, invoking both conformist and eco-feminist consciousness and collective resilience. And then in many of my poems, I use language as a weapon of social commitment. In the poetry collection, if you go through the poems one by one, you will realize that I do not use very much ornamental language. My language is incisive and ethically grounded. My diction is rooted in urgency. Every word that I utter in the collection breathes social commitment. There is no indulgence in linguistic acrobatics. Instead, my metaphors and symbols they strike with precision, bearing the weight of historical and emotional truth. And then in a couple of poems, I talk about domestic violence and trauma. There is one epistolary poem in this collection, Letter to My Unborn Daughter. So that talks about domestic violence, epistemic violence against women, and how women keep quiet on many occasions, and then at one point of time, when they feel that they cannot hold it any further, they have to talk to their sisters, and they have to talk to all men out there who understand what is masculinity to the true sense, then they speak out. So this particular poem, epistolary poem, Letter to My Unborn Daughter, it it uses domestic violence and trauma as the backdrop, and then there is instinctive imagery and intimate tones. I foreground the trauma of domestic violence. I witness the everyday violence that women endure, not as a spectacle but as a lived experience that must be named, mourned, and transformed into a call for justice. So that exactly what I'm trying to do in the poem, a letter to my unborn daughter. I'm asking my daughter to come back to me in yet another life with the power of the Panchamahakanyas. What are the qualities of the Panchamahakanyas that my unborn daughter should learn? I am putting that step by step in the paragraph, in the stanzas in the poem. And then somewhere I'm using mythic modernism and the feminine psyche. The poems in this collection are a unique confluence of modernist consciousness and mythic awareness. My voices and my poems they echo the psychological depth of Sylvia Plath and the cultural symbolism of Adrian Rich, while reclaiming kind of Indian consciousness. Many people ask me why Medusa? What is the Indianness about Medusa? I would like you to go through the poems. Somehow I have brought Medusa imagery from Western myth. Then I have appropriated, if I can use this word, I have appropriated that vis-a-vis Indian contexts, Indian texts and practice. And then in many of the poems, Panchamahakanyas, Draupadi, Kunti, and so many Indian characters, Indian mythical characters, unfailingly they come to my poetry off and on, even in Medusa. And then I use the cultural symbolism of Adrian Rich and Caroline Kaiser while remaining rooted in South Asian contexts in my poetry. And this kind of synthesis, it creates a new kind of mythic modernism in my poetry, and Medusa is the best example of that. I'm using Western myth, I'm quoting from Indian myth and folklore. I'm talking about Indian modernism and postmodernism, human relationships, gendered intimacies, emotional topography, mother-daughter relationships, romantic love, sensuous love and longing thereof, fractured love, solitude, betrayal, yearning, and then again modern living. My portrayal of intimacy is gendered as well as political, because for me the personal is political. I underscore the ways in which love, care, and kinship are shaped by patriarchal scripts, and occasionally the women are also deified, and then they come back as empowered women in aesthetic and political imperatives. For me, poetry is not merely self expression, it is transformation. If after writing a poem, I do not come out as a better human being than I was before I wrote it, then I think I should not write a poem. I should write a poem only when I can connect with my persona, when I can speak to you in my poetic voice, and then I can reach out to your heart and soul. So, this is exactly what I have been doing in all my short stories, my poetry collections, Medusa being my 10th poetry collection and my 23rd book. I am so happy that each poetry collection that I have ever written, or each poem, individual poem that I have ever written, has been accepted with kindness, compassion, empathy, and lot of love by all of you. For me, poetry is transformation. Each poem is an invocation of my strength and your strength, a ritual of reclamation. And my poetry collection, Medusa, is a poetic reclamation of power, a call to women, a call for women to look inward, confront pain, and then re emerge with energy, and not as a victim but as a narrator of your own myth. Be the narrator of your own myth, so that in future, if someone is going through what probably you have gone through, then your poetry can be, a helping hand for the person. The politics of voice and representation is very, very important for me in this collection. What makes Medusa academically compelling is it has meta poetic awareness. I have been very conscious while editing the poems. I wrote at one go, one by one I was writing the poems, I was not editing them. But at the end of the 67 or 70 poems, I exactly don't remember, I'll tell you. The poems were ready. I wanted to edit those myself. And then I sent it to a very dear friend who is also a poet, Shankar Narayan Malik. He went through the poems very carefully. He gave me a few critical comments. Then, after reading those critical comments, I looked at the poems once again. And then I found that most of the poems were academically very, very compelling. And then there was a meta poetic awareness in each poem. I was conscious of my politics of representation. I was thinking who speaks and who is spoken for. Is Nandini speaking to another Nandini, or I am a voice, a representative of many people out there, the suppressed voices, not just women, men, women, the queer, the third gender, children, the tribes, the folks, Dalits, so whoever doesn't have a voice. I asked myself, am I actually speaking for them? Who speaks and who is spoken for and who is silenced? I thought about that. My poetry disrupts the conventional narrative hierarchies, the social hierarchies, allowing women's voices to emerge as subjects of history and not just casualties. Since the beginning, I have always told my readers and my fellow poets, whenever they took an interview with me, that yes, there has been a lot of pain in your life, in my life, but then we should not be silenced there. We should speak for ourselves and also for people who don't have a voice. But yes, there should be a silver lining behind every piece of cloud. So in my poetry, with conscious effort, even after I write about suffering, pain, death, bloodshed, and whatnot, I write about everything. But I probably always attempt to conclude my poems with a line of hope. With that hope, love, and that instinctive happiness in me, and then that instinctive connectedness between me and my readers, I offer my 10th poetry collection, Medusa, to all of you. I thank my publisher, Satya Patnaik ji, Black Eagle Publications. He has done a very good, poetry book. The job is very well done. The quality of the paper and the painting is by my son, Nandini Sahu. He is an artist. He is a painter. So this cover, you can see that two images of Medusa, and one image has two shades, like every woman has two shades in her character. The other one is a bit of hazy, complex, and the snake hair of Medusa. I narrated the story of Medusa to him, and then he designed this cover, and I liked it, and the readers are also liking it very, very much. Ashok Paridaji from Black Eagle Publications, he has definitely done a good job. The paper quality is good, and the cover and everything is very good. White is always my favorite color, so a white cover with Medusa paintings by my son Nandini Sahu. What else I can ask for? So I am looking forward to hearing from my readers, your comments, your ideas, so that in future probably I can also incorporate those in my future poetry. I stop here. Thank you. Namaskar.